Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to What Now, What Next? Tackling Spent Nuclear Fuel for a Sustainable Future. My name is Emily Nunez, and I'm an environmental engineering student here at the City College of New York, and I'll be serving as your moderator today. I first got involved into this work through the collaboration-based siting program supported by the American Nuclear Society and the Department of Energy. I'll later explain what this is. But as a student, I'm still learning, and I want to emphasize that this panel is for all of us, whether you're an expert or completely new to the subject, to learn. So I want to begin by acknowledging this institution, ANS, DOE, and Climate Group for making this conversation possible. Sorry for the technical difficulties. My presentation is going to come up soon.
It's not me trying to fix it. Oops. Need to wing it.
Well, as they figure out the presentation, I'm going to continue with, yes, my speech. So collaboration-based siting, or CVS, is a program that explores how communities can engage in meaningful, collaborative decision-making about nuclear waste, storage, and disposal. Our goal today is not to dive into technical jargon, but to give you access to leading voices who can explain what spent nuclear fuel is, why it matters, and how its safe management plays a role in the transition of going into clean energy. Well, I had prepared a QR code for those who do not even know what spent nuclear fuel is. But I guess that's going to be for another time. And now we are fortunate to have a panel of experts from across government, industry, and academia. Rather than me introducing them one by one, I'll let each panelist briefly introduce themselves and their work. We're first going to start with my Zoom panelist and continue with our in-person panelists. I hope you can hear her.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hello, my name is Marlon Morales. I'm the director of the Office of Collaboration-Based Siting and the acting director of the Office of Disposal Research and Development at the Department of Energy. So my office is responsible for a lot of what Emily's talking about in finding a willing host community to site spent nuclear fuel going forward. And I look forward to our conversation today.
Dr. Sven Batter.
I want to go ladies first.
Thanks, Ben.
Sure.
Is it afternoon now? Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Megan Harkema. I am a researcher at Vanderbilt University. I do a few different things that are relevant to this conversation. So my work started in nuclear facility safety analysis for both advanced nuclear reactors, as well as facilities associated with the back end of the fuel cycle. So what's associated with spent nuclear fuel. I am also part of one of the groups that's an awardee, like the American Nuclear Society, for DOE's collaboration-based siting program, where we're going out and engaging with communities on the subject of spent nuclear fuel to better understand public values about the status of spent nuclear fuel in the United States and where they would like to see the program in the future.
So we're doing things. I'll do it. I'll go.
I know it's coming out of line.
John Kessler, currently consultant, just realizes I'm sitting up here, over 40 years in spent fuel management, storage, transportation, and disposal. I worked on the Yucca Mountain disposal facility when it was actually getting money for 17 years, still recovering from that. And so now I'm looking mostly at what do we do to manage the fuel in lieu of no disposal. So I think that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit.
Yeah, and hi, everyone. I'm Christina Lyatt. I'm the director of fuel cycle technology at Oklo, which is an advanced nuclear reactor company that is also planning to recycle not only its own fuel, but also existing spent fuel across the US. So when people ask, like, what about the waste? I say recycle it, right? I've been at Oklo for 7 months, but before that, I was a nuclear technology consultant supporting DOE's Advanced Research Projects Agency Energy, which, if you've heard of DARPA, it's like DOE's DARPA. So I was working on like high risk, high reward energy technology solutions in both the fission and the fusion space. So this included reprocessing, advanced reactor waste forms, transmutation, so not transportation, et cetera. And then I also worked at DOE NE in a sister office of, I guess, Marla, managing programs there at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And then before that, I was a postdoc at Lawrence National Lab, where I was working on recovery of uranium from seawater. So if you are interested in understanding how uranium from seawater can be a backstop to terrestrial supplies, I can also talk about that. So very excited to be here to talk about reprocessing and just advanced nuclear.
At least me. I'm Sven Bader from Orano Federal Services. It's a French company. I'm a technical consultant, been working for them and their predecessors for almost 30 years now. Orano in general does everything from mining all the way through reprocessing and disposal. My forte is really on the back end of the fuel cycle. You'll hear the back end quite often. Once that fuel comes out of the reactor, it goes into a spent fuel pool normally. Some of the advanced reactors don't. But we do spent fuel pools, we do the dry storage, we do the transportation, we do the reprocessing in France. We do the fuel fabrication out of the separated constituents from reprocessing, and that gets us to recycling. And then we also have supported disposal in the past, including having worked on Yucca Mountain for a couple of years. I don't usually like to refer to that because it's kind of a stain. But anyway, hopefully that gives you an overview.
Well, thank you all. With those introductions, let's begin our discussion then. For those who don't know, I usually go to conferences to learn about this topic, and I couldn't have held this panel without asking this question. So, what is the current state of spent nuclear fuel management in the US, and why has finding a long-term solution been so difficult?
Anyone else?
Yes,
I feel
anyone
like
can.
we should hand this to Marla first to give the federal perspective.
Please, Ms. Marla.
Well, hello. So I don't know if I'm on screen or not. So if I'm looking directly at you, great. If I'm not, then it's a floating voice in the ether. So spent nuclear fuel is currently stored safely and securely across the country at either operating reactors or independent spent fuel storage facilities, currently licensed under NRC. So your question was, what's the current status and why has it been so difficult?
Yes.
Okay, so Yucca Mountain is mandated by the Nuclear Policy Act. It was defunded in 2010. I will say, though, that part of what makes the conversation around nuclear so difficult is not because we are solving a technical or engineering problem, it's because we're solving a socio-political problem. So I think I won't speak for the panelists, and they can join in and chime in after. We aren't trying to figure out how to pull this off. We know how to do it, and we know how to do it safely, and we have been doing it safely. But finding conversations and understanding where the nuclear conversation is and making people feel comfortable with spent nuclear fuel isn't an easy task. That's the reality of that situation. So DOE's program going forward is to consolidate spent nuclear fuel and to find an ultimate disposition pathway, which would be a repository. Best of luck to us. We are beginning that process right now through collaboration-based siting program, which I believe we'll probably talk about a little bit later. But I'd like to turn it over to panelists who have different experiences on both the community outreach component and also the siting component. I think John worked on Yucca Mountain. Sven does his facilities with Orano. Everyone's got a background here, so I'd love to hear what they also have to say about it.
I can go. I'm an academic. Some of them were free to speak than some of the others here. As Marla said, there have been a lot of sociopolitical challenges associated with that. And a lot of that has to do with the political cycle. So the Nuclear Waste Policy Acts back in the 1980s made the Department of Energy responsible for the management of spent nuclear fuel and finding a repository, which is great. We need a federal entity responsible for this project. However, the Department of Energy is subject to political turnover and appointees when we change different presidential administrations, which unfortunately leads to changes in priorities and preferences and can impact what's happening and what happened with Yucca Mountain. But I do want to say that this is not all the Department of Energy's fault too. At one point in time, the Nuclear Waste Policy Acts enacted effectively a fee for commercial spent nuclear fuel generators to pay into to support the cost of building a repository and disposing of this fuel. And now, initially, that was intended to be an escrow account that the Department of Energy could use when it wanted to fund these back-end activities. However, unfortunately, due to legislation that had nothing to do with nuclear waste in the later 80s and into the 90s, congressional approval is now needed for the Department of Energy to access that fund to pay for its activities. And so this is another hiccup in the process that leads to some of these political challenges that we need to solve.
Take what I'm going to say with a grain of salt because I'm a technical guy. We can manage things. Unfortunately, managing means now storage, long-term storage. I totally agree with the previous speakers that it is a political problem. Yeah, there's NIMBY, but it's more than that because it's a funding issue. So the point is that it's not going to be tomorrow when we get a disposal program started. We're hopeful now that we have somebody in the particular division within DOE who might be able to start pushing on that. So I've seen Yucca Mountain, I don't want to use the word killed because it's on life support, um, uh, be affected by certainly a very strong senator from Nevada who managed to cut off all the funding for Yucca Mountain. But also, yeah, it's the whole funding mechanism where, yeah, it's a requirement. I forget what the right word is in budget speak. So the tax is required, the spending is optional. And there's a nice big pot of money there that Congress likes to hold on to and play with. So it's a long way to say, I've been at this a long time, seeing lots of things get stopped for political reasons, both at the state level and local level, although we do see more local support than we do at the state level. So I think you guys who are working on consent-based siting have a huge uphill battle to fight, just like you were saying. You know what the impediments are. We recognize at the state level, you've got to do something. Having said all that, we know we can manage spent fuel for a long time, even in storage. We've got good storage systems as they age. Well, I'll talk about it a little bit later. I have confidence that we can continue to store it, even though that is not efficient and far from where we want to be. But as a stopgap, we can continue to do that even with bigger and bigger inventories of spent fuel.
Yep. And so I guess I will just add, of course, I agree with everything that everyone has said so far. I'll just point out a few additional things for context. I think no one's mentioned the volume of waste or the amount of waste we have. I'm going to say waste because I'm the recycler, right? Waste. But we only have about 94,000 metric tons of spent nuclear fuel or used nuclear fuel sitting around the country and these different reactor sites. And this is after 50 or 60 years of generation of terabytes. I think it's about 65 terabytes of electricity. So that is a testament to the density of did I say terabyte? Terawatts, sorry, terawatts. We're talking power. So anyway, but that is a testament to the density of uranium as a fuel source. Not to mention even things like thorium, which I think we're going to talk about at some point. But in any event, it's actually a small amount. And so one of the things I always like to have people take away from discussions like this is that, yeah, we always talk about, oh, what about the waste? And it's all over the place and there's so much, but in the grand scheme of things, it's actually not very much. It's enough to fit in a football-sized field. And like I said, this is for 50 or 60 years of generation. Another thing I wanted to point out is that, like Megan and Marla said, there's the nuclear waste fund that the utilities have paid into. One thing that's been happening is that because the government has not fulfilled its responsibility to take the fuel and put it in a repository, they just kind of sue the government all the time to get the money back, right? They don't pay into it anymore because there was a court order that told them they didn't have to, but they just sue them on a regular basis now to recoup the cost of continuing to store the used nuclear fuel. And then the last two things I'll point out are that, does anybody know do we actually have a repository in the US? Does anybody know? Do we have one?
Yes.
Yep. So most people don't know that. We actually do have an operating repository in the US, in New Mexico. I actually went there. It was actually a pretty cool place. You should go see it. But we actually have one for defense waste, for what we call true waste, transuranic waste. And so we do have that. And then the other thing to kind of add insult to injury here is that other countries have been pursuing a repository. They are much farther along than we are. Look at countries like Finland. And so it's just a shame that, you know, they're so, they're so far along and we're still sitting up here spinning our wheels in political space because some people have made it a career to not like Yucca Mountain. I'm sorry, I'm not looking at you because you're one of those people. But certain senators have made it a career to not advance Yucca Mountain. So that's a little frustrating. But I think with programs like the collaborative based siting program, which is kind of what's being used overseas, if I'm correct, for the repositories. There's a lot of consent, like a lot of coordination with communities. I think we can start making progress in that direction.
Not a whole lot left to be said other than, yeah, industry is just as much culpable here. And this is an opportunity now. There's $50 billion in that waste fund. I think believe DOE has said there's enough money there for at least one repository. If we look at the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, we actually have more fuel than that first repository was sized for. So we actually probably need a second repository, even though Yucca Mountain could have been expanded. Yeah, this is an opportunity for industry to look at an alternative. If you throw this material away, it's going to be hard to get back. Yes, we now have an opportunity, and I know we're going to talk about reprocessing. Reprocessing is actually what this spent fuel was supposed to initially go through. We in this country had reprocessing planned. This state has West Valley. Probably don't want to talk about it, but we'll bring it up definitely. There's a couple other plants, the Agnes facility in Barnwell, South Carolina, the GE facility in Morris. They were all planning on reprocessing the fuel. When the president, I don't know if it was an executive order, but President Carter basically crippled the reprocessing activities. And that's when the Nuclear Waste Policy Act came around. So the Nuclear Waste Policy Act was a response to not being able to reprocess. And here we are not able to do a repository, and we're coming back to reprocessing. So yeah, it's kind of an ironic twist on things, but I think if you look at the executive orders that were issued by this presidential administration, you'll see that reprocessing is highly recommended. It's almost like a substitute for disposal. But I just want to be clear, if we reprocess, we still need to do disposal.
Okay, thank you. So we're in Climate Week, so I have to ask this question to Dr. Harkema, because yes, I know that you do research in nuclear and environmental engineering. So what emerging technical environmental considerations do you think are most overlooked when planning for long-term SNF management?
Really excellent question. And so I really want to sort of lean into the environmental aspects of this. So at Vanderbilt, we don't have a nuclear engineering program. We have a nuclear environmental focus in our environmental engineering program. And it does have a graduate school in case any of you are interested. And so with that, we take the environmental to heart more than the traditional nuclear engineering route. And what comes with that, in the way we see it, is a real connection to sort of bringing people into the engineering design process for these types of facilities. Because as we've seen and sort of talked about to date, there's been a lot of public pushback. And maybe instead of being engineers telling people, hey, this is how you need to do it, maybe we bring them into the design process and say, if you are going to consent or sign on to having one of these facilities in your backyard, what are the safety features, perhaps above what's required by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, that you would like to see this facility have? The other things that we work on a lot are mis and disinformation with our partners at Rutgers University, and just how do we sort of, if not succeed, move forward in a general climate of sort of distrust in science, distrust in the government, and try to make progress on this issue. So yeah, socio-technical challenges are really what we need to address for spent nuclear fuel management.
Oh, I love that. And I love you mentioned nuclear in the backyard, in my backyard, especially, I'm sorry, because that sentence was brought into our consortium. And I found it interesting, like, are people willing to have nuclear in their backyard? So thank you for that. So a question for all of you.
Can I add to that real quickly? Because we talk a lot about collaborative siting in the context of consolidated storage and a repository. Think about new reactors now, right? They're actually having to go through collaborative siting as well, because the DOE hasn't taken fuel. So we've had some states where they said, look, we'll take a new reactor, which hopefully is good for the environment. But how do we ensure that, once the reactor's gone, I don't just have spent fuel sitting here? So it's a collaborative siting is becoming more important, not just to consolidated storage and repository program. It's actually coming all the way down to the reactors that we're trying to site in order to improve the environment.
Yeah, and also the other thing about collaborative siting is that I just wanted to bring in the co-location part, which is, I think, Sven, you were hitting on that too, but ANS has also been doing some outreach with different communities to talk about collaborative siting. And I participated in one, and I mentioned like the fact that, if you co-locate one of these consolidated, I keep saying consolidated, collaborative-based siting facilities, with, say, a reprocessing facility or anything like that, the interest goes up. The public opinion about it goes up because now it's no longer a waste dump. It's actually a revenue source, right? It creates a lot more jobs. You're generating, medical isotopes for space exploration. They're also they're high paying jobs as well because you have to be technically, skilled to do them. And so it's actually additive too. And so I don't know, Megan, if you know, like the folks at University of Oklahoma, my colleagues over there, I was participating in one of their collaborative base siting programs, and they were saying that like from their studies, they did see like the social technical evaluations, they did see that the public acceptance of nuclear waste facilities increased with the addition of more nuclear facilities, like a reprocessing facility or a reactor or something like that. Because like I said, no one likes the idea of having a waste dump in their yard, but they do like the idea of it like being a revenue source, like more of a revenue source. So.
And I would just add that the really great thing about collaboration-based siting is you don't have to have sort of what your predefined co-location is going to be. The public can have an input on what exactly the mission of both of those facilities can look like. And then you enter into agreements with a federal organization responsible or a commercial one, and they become part of the process throughout, and you're building this long-term trust in a relationship. And there are pockets of the country where this sort of long-standing nuclear mission is something that a community is proud of. I live in Tennessee, which is close to the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. And I mean, it's a bit different because there is a defense focus in part at that site, but you see this community that has been living with nuclear energy, including some nuclear wastes, since the 1950s, but they are so excited to bring in more nuclear activity into their area in the point where they're actually in a competition with other states to try to bring in more activity into the region.
I'd like to ask a question of the, I keep using the word consent, but collaborative based, that's it, that's the new word. You're doing this outreach. It's the state level that tends to kill things. So how much are you working with the state? What are the issues specifically with the state discussions about that issue?
I will say that we recognize the sensitivities there for our projects. And so we said, we're engineers, we're not the ones to have these conversations, which maybe it's humility, maybe it's a bit of fear, maybe it's both. But we do recognize their importance. And I know that there are other members working on CBS that are working with states. I know one of the other consortia is working with the National Governors Association and the National Association of Regional Utility Commissioners, whatever NARUC stands for, I can never remember. Yeah, and then Marla can obviously provide more background there because it's going to be the Department of Energy ultimately that's going to have to foster these relationships with states.
Yeah, so let me add a little bit to that. So part of what my office did maybe a few months ago was change from the term consent-based siting to collaboration-based siting. And that was for a number of reasons, but one of which was the idea of consent is almost impossible to define because consent almost sounds like you have to have 100% consensus. We're never going to get there realistically. But what we could do is collaborate. And we say collaboration because defining a community can be an interested party that's a person, it can be a county, it can be a state. And every single one of those levels is going to be vital and crucial to making this program successful. Cutting out local community elected officials is not the way to go. Maybe the trusted voice in the community is the local pastor or the emergency responder or the county commissioner. By the same token, conversations at the state level, which tend to be where things kind of fall apart, to be perfectly frank, in the long term, are what DOE and as part of our work in our program, as well as the consortia, are starting right now to get all levels of government, elected official, and decision makers in part of the conversation. So you have the right people in the room. If we're not completely transparent in this process going forward, if we're not earning public trust, just not at the local level, but the state level as well, it won't be successful. We're trying to take the lessons learned from international programs as well as lessons learned from WIP, which is a New Mexico facility, and Yucca Mountain, and trying to change our interactions of federal government with communities. And that will take all levels of engagement.
Well, thank you all. So my next question is, how does the lack of a federal repository impact the ability of nuclear power to contribute to climate goals?
That's a tough one, actually, in the sense that, like I was saying, industry and the regulator, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, I feel can manage storage of spent fuel for a very long time. And I know one of my questions was like, well, how do we do that? We've got improved containers, but we also are starting to develop and actually use, and Sven is heavily involved in this, ways to inspect the canisters to see if there's any kind of corrosion or something like that. We're also developing what we're terming mitigation. So what do you do if you see something like that? And it could be anything from trying to do something chemical on the surface to just replace the canister. And just replace the canister means you have to have a very special facility to cut the thing open, to pull all the spent fuel out, and it all has to be done remotely. And right now, actually, we don't have that facility either. So we have to manage it. I think we can. I like to see what, I like that industry is working with NRC to come up with some solutions there in terms of just making sure that the canisters continue to function the way they're supposed to function. So I'm saying, in my technical ignorance, that we can continue to store it, and we can store a heck of a lot more safely for a very long time. So my feeling is go ahead and expand nuclear. We can figure out how to store it. Maybe that's naive, and I fear that sometimes I can be, because there's going to be political issues if you introduce a new storage location or something like that. But strictly from a technical standpoint, we can continue to manage this. Absolutely, we need to proceed with at least disposal. Maybe reprocessing for advanced reactor technologies is very important, but we can carry on safely until we get our act together on disposal and maybe reprocessing as well. So I feel like there's technically not an impediment, okay? But politically there may be an impediment as we continue to store more.
Thank you.
You want to add?
No, I thought you wanted to say something, because I do.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a couple of things. Yeah, in general, I 100% agree with what John said, right? I mean, if you think about it, we've been, plowing along for decades, not just here, but also around the world without a repository. And if you look at countries like France, even Korea, France is 80% nuclear. They're pretty low emission, right? Probably the lowest emissions in all of Europe. And so they've done that without a repository. Now they are looking to build one, but they have been able to do this without a repository. Now, but the other thing that John mentioned, he said there could be like a political element to this. And I agree with that. Like, it turns out that there are certain states, there have been several states in the last like 10 years that's starting to change, starting to go down, that have moratoria on new nuclear until you do something about the waste. Like that, I think they're starting to reverse that now because they've heard about things like recycling. But to be serious though, there are some moratoria. And so like, if those states are trying to set climate goals, it's really hard to do that without a strong nuclear portfolio. And so they have to, wrestle with this moratorium that they have on building new nuclear, be it advanced or light water. There are states that just won't allow it because there's no repository.
The problem with the nuclear industry is we don't have a problem with our spent fuel. Yeah, if we had a problem, maybe we had more action. Not to say that we ever should do that, but there's only one thing that I could see right now being a problem, and that's as spent fuel sits in these canisters for long and long periods of time, it becomes what we call self-protecting right now, which means if you open the canister, you'll die. After some period of time, a lot of that radiation is decayed away, and if you're dedicated enough, you can actually open the canister and move the fuel. It's going to be 100 years at least, probably. So, but self-protection is one area that is the only change that's going to occur with the spent fuel over time in these storage points. And as a result, yeah, if your fuel becomes non-self-protecting, you have to increase your security force on the site. You have to go from a reactive security force to a preventative security force. So that's a significant cost. And who bears that cost? It's the taxpayer, because the DOE hasn't collected their fuel.
And with
Yeah.
that, I just want to sort of clarify when Christina mentioned, that the utilities who own the spent fuel are suing the federal government. It's probably helpful to have a little context for just how much money that is. I think currently the number is something on the order of the federal government has doled out $10 billion to utilities in response. And the estimated remaining liability goes up every year, and it's right now sitting between $40 to $50 billion. And then the other kicker here is that when the federal government pays out that money to the utilities, it actually doesn't come out of the nuclear waste fund. So that pot of money that was set aside to pay for spent nuclear fuel disposal, it comes out of something called the Federal Judgment Fund, which gets back to political problems, because the Federal Judgment Fund is effectively a open pot of money that Congress doesn't have to vote on every year, that is available to pay for judgments against the federal government. So it's another thing that sort of takes this problem out of Congress's immediate sort of eyesight and line of focus, which makes it harder to sort of move forward from the policy perspective that we need to.
I know Ms. Morales had something to say. I don't know if yeah.
I was going to say exactly what Megan just said. I was going to say we've already paid out $11 billion. We have an additional $38 billion to pay out for our current fleet. So when we're talking about a problem, and as she said, it's the taxpayers who are currently paying this, whether or not they recognize it or not. Your question was, and I just wanted to I fully support everything that the panelists have said, but I wanted to add that when you're talking about new nuclear, you're talking about carbon emissions and climate change and all of those, we have to have an answer to the back in the fuel cycle. What about the waste is asked every single time someone brings up a topic of new nuclear. So if you want to go down that path of new nuclear, what about the waste is the question you've got to have an answer to. And right now, that's what we're trying to do, slowly but surely. And just design a program that's agnostic of politics so that it is enduring. We're trying. I'll put that out there. We're trying.
Oh, yeah. So yes, what about the waste is actually a question that comes up in every conference I've been to. So I wanted to ask you, what other efforts besides CBS is the U.S. doing to achieve that?
To achieve addressing spent nuclear fuel?
Yes.
So right now, that is our main program. So our main program right now, for at least for the Office of Nuclear Energy that I work in, is to safely transport spent nuclear fuel, consolidate it, and ultimately find a permanent disposition pathway, which would be a repository. As the entire panel has said, and as we were talking about, it is currently safely stored. So the impetus for us moving it right now is the fact that we are sued $800 million a day. So those are a day. So our liability goes up astronomically and exponentially. So that's our impetus right now. But I'm not positive that completely answers your question, but that is the program that we're working on right now.
Yes, thank you. Mhm.
Just want to add a little bit of context. The industry is suing because it's, as was mentioned, it's DOE's responsibility to start taking the fuel, which means they had to have contracts with every nuclear utility to that had a date upon which the DOE was supposed to start accepting waste, even if it's in a DOE storage facility. That was 1998, I believe. was for those contracts that they were supposed to start picking up waste. And in sort of industry defense, so industry planned for a long time ago to say, okay, we're going to be able to start getting our waste off site because DOE is going to start taking it by 1998. Well, that didn't happen for lots of the reasons we're talking about. So then the utilities were forced to sue for damages, like one would if you have a contract violation. And now this is what's happened, right? This has gone on now for decades where we haven't had anything, and it's going to continue to go on for decades with the current contract situation. So that's the reason why DOE is having to pay things out of I'm sorry, it's not DOE, it's the government that's paying it out of the judgment fund. And getting into the weeds a little bit, like you were saying, the judgment fund really isn't looked at that hard by Congress. It's just like, okay, we got to pay what the judgment fund is, and it's a mandatory spend. And so we don't look at it hard. Getting something out of the nuclear waste fund is not mandatory. And if you spend money out of that fund because of all these limitations and what you can fund, and every single area has limits, then they're like, well, we need this money for other things, and so we're not going to spend out of it. So it's that weirdness of the political system also that makes it difficult for DOE to be able to do what they need to do, because Congress is not providing the funding. And anyway, that's why the utilities are suing too.
Yeah, and this just reinforces what Sven said earlier. It's kind of like the problem with the nuclear industry is that there's not a problem, You've got a fund that no one looks at. They can just, the utilities can keep suing basically indefinitely until there's some kind of forcing function, right? And so, yeah.
Right, and that makes the utilities less interested in progress on transportation and disposal or reprocessing, because it's like, well, we're getting paid. And so the problem is that there's not impetus even from industry so much to move things along.
I would say they kind of
Yeah.
are interested in the recycling side
Okay.
because it's better than most.
Yeah, it depends on the industry that you're talking to at the moment.
Good point.
So, and I will just say, operating commercial reactors, it's not ideal, but one of the big costs associated with continued on-site storage of spent nuclear fuel is really the security force that you need to sort of be responsive if there were any sort of potential terrorist attacks that could occur. If you're at an operating nuclear plant, you already have a security force there because of your reactor and your requirements to the NRC. But once you start talking about decommissioned plants, where all that's remaining is a pad on the ground with spent nuclear fuel storage casks, that cost looks pretty significant. I mean, in terms of their percentages of where they're spending their money. And so that's a different conversation. And you also get into sort of the ethical questions there, where they're no longer receiving the benefits of jobs in their community or energy from the nuclear power plant, but they're still stuck with this waste that they did not sign on for. And so there is an ethical impetus to solve this that we do need to discuss here and keep in mind.
And there's a change. The standard contract we talk about only applies to the existing reactors and not including Vogtle 3 and 4, which is the last two reactors we just put online a couple of years ago in the United States at a huge cost. Those two reactors can't sue the government. So they won't have the luxury of having their dry storage paid for in the future or any other spent fuel storage. And that goes for all the advanced reactors and all the future reactors as well. This new standard contract doesn't allow that. The contract does say, hey, the DOE will come pick up your fuel in 20 years, but it might not be till 10 years after shutdown either. And that's 10 years of no money coming from your reactor that you now have to pay for your spent fuel storage. So there's a change coming. If we don't start finding solutions, we're going to, potentially, handicap our industry even further.
Okay.
Good point.
Yeah, my next question actually is meant to Dr. Kessler, and it's about a lack of a federal repository. So given the challenges the US faces without a federal repository, how do you current strategies for consolidated storage of dry storage system hold up over the longer term, and what additional safety precautions, safeguard, or innovations might be needed to ensure safety, security, and public confidence until a permanent solution is found?
I actually think we probably addressed that already with multiple panelists here. So yeah, it's got to be storage. Sven talked about one of the long-term, you both talked about the long-term issue of added security that's needed. But again, if we have to, we will. We're not going to let it sit there. Whoever we is, industry will not. NRC will require that somebody do it. And I think that even DOE would have to and would pick up the ball and run with it. So I guess I'm thinking is that for the existing light water reactors, and thank you for correcting me, that I was only talking about those. We can manage things with storage and keeping it used fuel, unused fuel, however you want to say it. So we can continue to store, and we know how to store it safely. And now I'm talking about the existing light water reactors. Now we get into advanced reactors like what Christina is working on now. And that's the part where I become more ignorant. And what I was asking Christina earlier about effects on the industry is how long can the particular advanced reactor design that Christine is involved with go without reprocessing or the need for additional fuel that may be hard to get? And that's the part where there could be effects, right? Christina was saying, if we don't make some progress there, the advanced reactor technologies could suffer in terms of bringing those online. So yeah, thank you for expanding my view.
I think this is a good point to point out. I mean, we haven't really talked about what a deep geologic repository is. And I mean, we're all very familiar with it because we hear the term every day. But so this is an underground, they call it disposal, but it's effectively a long-term storage facility that's thousands of meters underground, and where the spent nuclear fuel is stored until theoretically the radiation decays away, and that takes tens of thousands of years. But I think it's interesting here because we're kind of jumping to this DGR solution, and that is technically the best
Geologic repository.
that is technically, you know, where we're at, and that is the best choice moving forward. But just for fun here, I think it's interesting to note that before that was the solution we came to, back in the early history of the nuclear industry, there were a bunch of wild ideas out there, you know, everything from shooting nuclear waste into space, to sinking it deep within the ocean. And if you really want to read some interesting technical reports from the 40s and 50s, I would strongly recommend you go find those. But the point I want to make here when it comes to things like what we're talking about today is that everything has basically been thought of. So there's really not any new ideas. There's old ideas cobbled together given the current situation that we're in to try to find the best path forward. And right now, a deep geologic repository is that best path forward that we have.
So nobody wants to bring up the deep borehole disposal.
So deep borehole disposal is great, but on the scale that we need to dispose of spent nuclear fuel, it's just impractical in my personal opinion. So
Yeah, so yeah, I just brought it up because it's another concept that is, I think, kind of gaining traction, at least in the US. It's this idea of drilling holes in the ground and placing the fuel kind of at an angle. And correct me guys if I'm misrepresenting this, but you know, putting it deep underground as opposed to like just, you know, carting it into a repository consisting of tunnels. And so that is another concept that has gained some traction. And so, but there's no, I guess, legislative or regulatory, you know, kind of impetus for it. So it's like, in my mind, it's an uphill battle, but I'm not against it. It's just, you know, it's, I personally don't know what I think they'd have to overcome some regulatory challenges, but, it's another alternative, and they claim that like it's, you know, it's more flexible in terms of like acceptance criteria and things like that. But yeah, if you're interested in that, look it up. It's deep borehole disposal.
So I just want to add something to that. So part of some of the topics that come up when it comes to deep borehole is because it is an option. That is correct. I'm more leaning toward what Megan said, that in terms volumetrically, the amount of spent nuclear fuel we have it doesn't make a lot of sense. So if we had a deep geologic repository for our current, at the end of the current fleet's 180,000 metric tons, we need about 70 miles of borehole, or sorry, tunnels. So if you were to equate that to boreholes, then doesn't look good spatially in the space-time continuum there. But in addition to that, it also has to be retrievable. One of the issues that boreholes tend to have an issue or a topic that comes up is the retrievability of it if you use boreholes. That's currently required by law, whether it's a repository or any version of that, it needs to be retrievable. So.
Okay.
But I'm glad they're working on it. You know, the point is that right now the research is on doing a full demonstration, which is needed. I mean, deep geologic repositories, well, we don't have one in this country. Well, we do. I'm sorry. That's the website. We've done them. One could argue we know how to do them. So yeah, this deep borehole disposal idea is a new kid on the block. Yeah, it's got some limitations, but I certainly support continuing to get the option developed for the places that it would make sense to do so.
Okay. Continuing with the question, what about the waste? And I know Dr. Batter wanted to say some things about this, and I wanted to ask you all, are alternatives like advanced recycling, reprocessing, or different storage technologies feasible for the US? And I know you guys have started on this, but I want you to spend on this, and I would also want you to tell our audience what is the difference between recycling and reprocessing, please.
Go for it, Sven.
I mean, we both
Yeah.
have a lot to say about this, but you're not spending. So I was like, I'm just trying to hold back here.
So, yeah, so let me start with the difference between reprocessing and recycling. So reprocessing is part of recycling. Reprocessing is when you take your fuel and you somehow, through chemical separations or through pyroprocessing or some fluorides, you separate what's useful. And there's always a debate about what's useful. Over 90% of the spent fuel is still uranium. So uranium is one of the most useful benefits that you can separate. There's also plutonium. We don't like to separate plutonium in the United States, so we'll probably mix it with uranium when we separate it, and maybe some other transuranics. Just it depends on who does it what.
And that's to make it harder to be turned into bomb
But
material.
yeah, for proliferation reasons, and to be and I have to step back on that because this is reactor grade plutonium. This is not weapons grade plutonium. So there have been attempts to make bombs out of reactor grade plutonium. They're horrible. They're uncontrollable. And so, why waste your time with trying to do this unless you got a lot of spent fuel and that's your only approach? It's a lot better to enrich the uranium to levels that you can make a bomb, but we're not here to talk about bombs. So you separate, reprocessing is the separation of the useful components. Recycling is taking that reprocessed material, the separated material, and now making a fuel out of it. So, if you look at the waste conundrum we have out at Hanford, they didn't, they weren't making a product other than a bomb, but they weren't, they're leaving all the waste behind. The whole effort was to separate materials for reuse in a bomb, not reactor. If you look in the UK, the Sellafield example, they reprocessed almost all their fuel. Now they have the largest plutonium pile in the world. Because they didn't make fuel out of it, or didn't make enough fuel out of it. So, so that's the difference between reprocessing and recycling. So reprocessing, separations, recycling, separations plus fuel fabrication. Make use of it. Don't store it. And yeah, so the benefits to the reprocessing are multifold. I'll start off with the executive orders. The first thing you want to look at the executive order long-term goal is to quadruple nuclear power in the United States. Well, if you're going to quadruple nuclear power, you're going to have to probably quadruple uranium mining, which we don't do very well in the United States. You'll have to do the quadrupling of the milling, the conversion, the enrichment, the deconversion, and the fuel fabrication. Well, that's a lot of effort. If you do reprocessing, now I'm putting a new feedstock into that process. So I'm reducing my uranium mining, potentially eliminating the milling, and reducing other activities that are associated with the fuel cycle. So yeah, that's part of the fuel fabrication. So that one benefit therefore is, I'm putting stuff back into the fuel cycle. Problem is it's more expensive, right? I mean, it's cheap to mine material right now, and the uranium prices are not really all that high. They're growing quicker. And it gets worse if you use something called high assay low enriched uranium, or HALEU, because that requires even more mining in order to get that material. So now I'm really making an environmental problem, if you want, from the mining aspect. And I say that my company mines, so I don't want to say it's environmental a problem. It's just a blight. The next benefit for reprocessing is that, okay, now I'm taking out 90% of the fuel that's uranium and 1% of plutonium. Well, that leaves me about 4% of other material, fission products, we call them, or raffinates. That's greatly reduces the amount of volume that you have to go throw away into a repository. Now, it's not a 4% versus 100% reduction, because I have to vitrify vitrify that fission product, or cement it, or some way make those fission products immobilized, and that increases its volume. So I don't get a clear 4% reduction in overall volume that's going to a repository. In France, we reduced the volume of a repository by a factor of 14, I believe it is. So it's a significant reduction in the waste. And France only plans on disposing of high-level waste and long-lived intermediate level waste. No spent fuel, no used fuel, no spent MOX, no used other materials or refuse. So you got the benefit of the repository, you get a benefit of fuel stock. Fission products have a lot of useful components in it. If you can separate them, that's a challenge. I don't know if we have any radiochemists in here, but if you like chemistry, that's the big challenge, is trying to cleanly separate things without creating new waste streams. We have cool processes that do separations, but they create havoc with new waste streams. So it's always you always have to look at the life cycle of these activities. Yeah, but there are americium-241 in those fuels that can power a satellite for, I don't know how long Voyager 1 and 2 been up there. How old are you, John? So just
Old.
give you context. Yeah, Voyager 1 and 2 are up there. They were plutonium-238, which is very hard to get. If you substitute that with americium-241, you could have the same kind of duration. So there are other fission products that can be used, that can be teased out of there. And then the final benefit is, as it's already been mentioned here, as we're talking about consolidated storage is a couple hundred jobs maybe, mostly security jobs, not necessarily the most high paying jobs. So if you add a reprocessing facility and a recycling plant, fuel fabrication to that, and maybe enrichment for the uranium, now you're talking about thousands of jobs. Le Hague, which is a 1,600 metric ton per year facility in France, employs about 5,000 people. The plant that makes the fuel, Malox, employs about 800 people. So you're talking 6,000 high-paying jobs. Yeah, well, not all high-paying jobs. You still need security. So not to say security doesn't get paid well, but it's not as well as some of the other engineers. So those to me are the three big benefits to reprocessing and recycling. And I'll let Christina add to that.
Yeah, because this is my absolute favorite topic, but I know you said a lot of the things that I normally would say, but I'll add some additional, no, it's fine. Add some additional context to it. One of the biggest things that excites me, the reason I came to Oklo, right, is that we are trying to combine full recycle of spent fuel with fast reactors. So fast reactors are nuclear reactors. They're different from the ones right now in the sense that they use higher energy neutrons to undergo cost fission, right? It's well known in many studies, including an INL fuel cycle study that was published about 11 years ago, that fast reactors can allow you to burn a lot more of that uranium than the current light water reactor fleet can do, right? And so as Sven pointed out, you know, we can recover like about 95% of the material in used fuel or spent fuel is uranium. And so for the most part, like existing countries that do recycling, they just store that uranium as a resource. It is actually possible to use that in a fast reactor and actually burn it down and get up to like 100-fold more, like higher uranium utilization. Also, the technology that we're looking at involves recovering not only plutonium, but also americium and other what we call minor actinides, right? And so we've been talking this whole time about the about repositories and how like, well, right now we have 70,000 metric tons that were supposed to go in Yucca Mountain, and we already need more because another repository because we have about 94,000 metric tons. Well, part of that, so there's a lot here to unpack. So if you do the recycling, the volume reduction is such that it would take forever to fill up a repository if it's done well, right? Part of my career has been working with DOE, both as a federal employee and as a contractor, as a consultant really, on recycling. And some of the things that we looked at were advanced waste forms, right? And so this is like a material that you can use to actually stabilize the remaining, that 4% that Sven was talking about, in a specific matrix in a high volume. So you don't have to have so much. The volume is really low. So you can talk about even much lower reductions in the volume of waste. The other part about this is that by recovering the plutonium and all these other things like americium and curium and recycling them, it improves the performance of the repository because repositories such as Yucca Mountain are based, like the loading of it, right? The 70,000 is kind of influenced by the amount of heat that's generated by your packages. And so it turns out that the long-term heat load or heat generation of a repository is caused by plutonium, americium, curium, things like that. So if you can recover it and get energy,
Strontium.
that's what, so I can go on. I'm gonna try because I can talk forever about this. But it turns out that like if you do that, that affects a long-term repository thing, right? And so that's important to me because I want to have maximum energy recovery with minimum waste generation. And I think it's unethical to have to require monitoring of a repository for millions of years because you will not recycle the plutonium and americium and curium because those are driving long-term heat generation, right? And so if you do that, that reduces like the heat load. You can load up the repository with more material. There's also other isotopes like cesium and strontium, like Sven said, that have other applications. Sorry. Like cesium and strontium that have applications in space for underwater exploration, things like that. Those are also heat generating nuclides. And so all of this recovery, you're getting benefits of like from reuse of this instead of just throwing it away. And so that improves your repository performance. I'm not saying you don't need the repository. I'm saying that the amount, like the stability of the waste that's actually going in there is a lot better, right? And then I guess a couple of other things, because there's always so much to say on this. I just wanted to kind of piggyback off of what Sven pointed out regarding the uranium requirements, right? So we're talking about quadrupling nuclear in the US, for example, that needs like, maybe 4 times as much uranium. We're not even considering the fact, there are 2 other things you have to consider. A lot of these new reactors that people are so interested in use HALEU, which is even more uranium that you need to have. The US sucks that we have really poor uranium. I'm sorry. We're not like Canada. We're not like Kazakhstan. We're not like Australia with the 20% ores and things like that. Our uranium's not that good. If we want to be, independent or what's the word I'm looking for here? Like have our own self-sufficient. Yeah. Like we have a lot of uranium sitting in spent fuel. But anyway, but there's also the fact that China and Russia are leading the way in building new reactors right now. Most of the reactor development right now is happening in China and Russia. That's even more uranium that is not available to us. And so right now, yeah, we're saying the uranium prices are going up a little bit. We're what, at $110 a kilogram. As you eat into that, the amount of cheap uranium you have available goes way down really fast. And so eventually I expect that uranium costs are going to go way up. And so an alternative to that, or a supplement to that, could be the plutonium, americium, minor actinide based fuel that you can burn in fast reactors. So
I'll be sort of a loyal opposition, but not
I
too
expected
loyal.
that.
Good rehearsal.
In the sense that right now, the way the industry is and is likely to be for another 20 years, it's expensive. We don't need it right now, okay? And the issue there is, so you can't make a case, a good economic case for reprocessing right now. And maybe that'll change. I'm not worried about the volume of spent fuel. It's more the decay heat, which is why I was giving Christina a hard time about cesium and strontium. It has relatively high decay heat. And even if you process, you still got to dispose of cesium and strontium. You're unlikely to be able.
Oh, I'm saying you're not going to dispose of it. I'm saying you're going to use it.
Yeah, I was about to say, there's a company out there called Zeno Power
Exactly.
that is currently using strontium-90 from DOE sites to power radioisotope thermoelectric
this
generators.
much. I mean, that's.
I mean,
if you build a big reprocessing facility, that's a lot of cesium and strontium to use. And again, I don't know whether the market's
well,
there.
it's
but
been stored at INL for decades.
Oh,
Yeah, so you can do local.
you can store it, right? And so if you want to store it for what, about 300 years, then the cesium and strontium decay.
I'm saying you don't even want to do that. That's what I'm saying. So the decay product of strontium-90 is yttrium-90, which is a medical isotope. So even if you don't use it for space, and like I said, deep sea exploration, Xenopower is interested in that. There's a couple of other companies that are interested in that. Like, it can be used. I don't see the point of like using it, putting it in a.
Because you have to reprocess, and that costs a lot of money right now. Okay.
Yeah.
And the economic case may come. Okay. And I think if we proceed with the current administrative mandate, and we can increase, maybe not quadruple, yeah, we might start to need it. So the other more political question is, maybe right now, economically, it doesn't make sense. But by the time it makes sense, we are gonna need it. We're gonna need reprocessing, and it takes a long time for a reprocessing facility and a lot of money for that to happen. And so we need a leader who will get ahead of the curve. Industry's not that good at it when you're talking about that amount of money. Industry will kick in some. We need the federal government to start proceeding or providing research, funding, whatever, to get a reprocessing facility stood up so that when we really need it, it's there. Because we wait until we really need it, we're going to be waiting a long time, and that's going to screw up like Christina's company's plans if we have to wait a long time. So I'm sort of anti-reprocessing, but I'm also saying let's look forward and get things going, because I hope we will need it.
So I have to ask you a question on that. So why do you think that reprocessing facilities are so expensive? What do you think is driving the cost of that?
Sven could probably answer that better than I, since I don't know the details. I mean, but I would assume it would be several $billions just to build it. Again, Sven would know the best of all of us on what the cost to build it is. Then there's the regulatory, then there's additional research. We built one before, but it's so long ago that that's probably not worth going back and looking at. So I think it's the cost. The other thing I keep thinking about is, okay, so we're disposing of something that's very long-lived radionuclides. Maybe some of it we can recycle, maybe some of it we can use for some other purpose. We got some really long-lived radionuclides we're going to have to deal with no matter what. And so one of the things that we do when we're trying to model these million-year processes, and what's the dose to some critical group, meaning they're in the wrong place, doing the wrong things. They don't know how to find radiation. So we calculate doses, hypothetical doses, to these people that live 1,000,000 years from now. And we're finding the dose rates when you compare to natural background, because you're all getting like 300 millirem a year in natural background radiation. So we're talking about 15 millirem is kind of the dose limit in the current standards. So if I'm getting maybe that much dose to some hypothetical people that live 1,000,000 years from now, and I want to transfer that to absolutely assured dose from running a reprocessing facility, that needs to be thought about too.
Oh,
in
why
my
are you
opinion.
saying absolutely sure? I mean,
Because
I
you're
guess
gonna get some radiation from running the facility.
there's a lot to unpack here.
Of course, there's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
And I know that you probably have other questions.
So I'll
and
just
stuff.
follow up really quickly on the cost estimate.
I
So,
wanted to address that too.
yeah, so the
but-
cost
all right.
cost estimate clearly depends on the type of process that you're going to put together. Is a small modular process or a large plant? The economies of scale are important. Life cycle estimates are important. So if you do modular, you probably want to be sure to be making sure that it can be expanded to get your economies of scale eventually. I can tell you in France right now, we're looking at building a new reprocessing plant, so another 1,600 metric ton per year facility. And we're talking about multi-millions of billions of dollars. And it's probably tens of billions of dollars. They're not cheap. There's a lot of construction that's involved. I can tell you in the US, we had a very bad experience with our MOX fuel fabrication facility down in Aiken, South Carolina. I think we were at 10 billion when we finally got canceled. And the main reason is we had no US.
MOX is the kind
Sorry,
of
yeah,
fuel
sorry.
that you reprocess it, you get plutonium and uranium out, you mix it with some new fuel. And so that mixed oxide, plutonium, uranium is what we call MOX.
And that plant was, about 10 billion, and it was mainly because there was no U.S. infrastructure left in nuclear. Vogtle 3 and 4 suffered the same fate. We're trying to rebuild our nuclear infrastructure in this country. It's difficult to do. We kind of trivialize it at times, but some of the things we had to do were crazy. I mean, we had to send our own inspectors to plants because those plants can't inspect them per a QA policy, NQA1 policy. Yeah, we're not talking
Nuclear
cheap
quality
nuclear
assurance.
assurance quality. Yeah, sorry, acronyms all over the place. I apologize. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Christine.
so sorry. Yeah, so I knew these arguments were going to come up because like a lot of times when people talk about the cost of, I know. I was actually looking forward to this. But a lot of times when people talk about the cost of a reprocessing facility, yeah, I mean, I've worked on reprocessing for a long time. And I'll back up, well, not, I guess 5 years. But anyway, I will back up by saying that before I came to Oklo, I helped, release a program focused on improving the economics of reprocessing facilities, right? Because to both of their points, right? If you do any kind of cost analysis for large reprocessing facilities, especially aqueous ones, the estimate for say 1,000 metric ton per year throughput, I've seen numbers ranging from 2 billion to 40 billion, and those are old numbers. So I'm not even that's not even with inflation, right? And so what I say to that though, I'm sorry. Oh,
No.
yeah. So what I say to that though is, those are always pure X type facilities. They have a lot of what we call unit operations, a lot of like separation steps. There's a lot of off gas, like it's a very complicated system, right? And so the technology that we're looking at, for example, is what I call an advanced reprocessing technique. And so that was one of the things that you had asked me about a second ago, but I thought I was running out of time. But there are new, more modern, more modular or smaller footprint facilities that don't have a lot of those safety concerns that aqueous facilities have, right? Because by virtue of the fact that they don't use water. And so the technique that we're using at Oklo is called pyroprocessing. It's a high temperature process, runs at 500 to 700 degrees C. You can use it to recover uranium, plutonium, minor actinides. And it's a batch process that is amenable to being modularized. And so there have been cost studies that show that for such facilities on like maybe a 400 or 500 metric ton per year scale, they're actually much cheaper than an aqueous facility. And so, you know, we at Oklo, we believe that we can build this facility economically, right? It's a first of a kind, so we do recognize it's going to be more expensive. And this is even without considering, oh, we can get the cesium and strontium and the krypton-85, which by the way, only comes from Russia right now, things like that. Even without that, we think we have a good business case for the facility. There are also other recycling companies out there that are looking at different types of reprocessing. So there's Curio that's also looking at a combined fluoride volatility process with pyroprocessing. I also love fluoride volatility. I can talk to you about that as well, because I do also have a background in radiochemistry separations. So so there are other companies
We can
that
geek you to death.
looking, yeah, I'm trying not to, I'm trying not to. But seriously, so we think that, you know, you couple that with, you know, simpler processes, fewer unit operations, advanced waste forms, advanced manufacturing techniques, we think that the cost should be able to go down. Now, the last thing I'll point out, because I know we're over time now, is that a lot of times, like, you know, people will look at the capital cost of a reprocessing facility and just blow it off because they're like, well, it just costs too much. It's $20 billion. Let's just do once through, right? So right now the US does once through of what we call a once-through fuel cycle. So that involves just taking uranium out of the ground, making fuel out of it, putting it in the reactor, and presumably putting it in a repository, right? What countries like France do, it's a closed fuel cycle because they're, well, partially closed, but closed fuel cycle. I didn't know if I wanted to be
Not closed yet. Not
specific,
closed yet,
but it's
but
partially
different
closed.
discussion.
We want it fully closed, but anyway, it's a partially closed fuel cycle in the sense that they recycle the plutonium, right? And like I said before, Oklo wants to do a fully closed fuel cycle that involves recycling all the actinides. The other companies that are looking at this also want to do this. Where I was going with this is so a lot of times these cost studies look at the capital cost of building a facility and maybe even the operating cost. But what they do not quantify very well, in my opinion, is the costs associated with, like, the sort of the life cycle cost, right? Like, what is the cost of continuing to spend billions of dollars siting a repository and then repackaging the fuel to go to the repository and transport it to the repository and load in the repository and monitor the repository? Like, how can you make the case that building a recycling facility or two is less, like, more expensive than continuing to build all these repositories? It doesn't make sense to me. And so there's that element of it, but there's also what I consider to be as kind of social, like an ethical component to this, where in the sense of, oh, hey, you know, we use this fuel and we got our energy and it's probably cheap, but hey, next generation, why don't you just watch it for the rest of time? You don't get that benefit from the energy. And so I like recycling because it also allows us to continue to reap the benefits of that energy without passing on this huge burden to subsequent generations.
I will be very quick, I promise. At least I will try to be very quick. I'm ambivalent on reprocessing. I'm going to play the middle ground here. But the first thing I will note is in the United States, we already undertake recycling activities that are not economically viable. Glass recycling is one of the best examples of that. It's not economically viable. We've decided as a community that that is consistent with our values, our ethics, and we're going to do it. So there is precedent here for continuing with reprocessing. One of the things I want to point out from the policy perspective is that you see there's all of these different reprocessing technologies that are being proposed right now. And kind of getting to what John said, you know, in 20 years, we need to be ready to move on this. And so there's some parallels that can be drawn from sort of advanced reactor development. You know, 5-ish years ago, the DOE funded 5 to 10 different reactors with a pretty significant lump of funds to start doing pretty intense design work. But now we're at the point that we need to start whittling down which of those technologies we actually perceive to be viable so that we could, I mean, if not put all of our eggs in one basket, put them in 2 to 3 baskets so that we can actually have a higher chance of achieving success. So in 5 to 10 years, that's where I'd like to see us on the reprocessing side. You know, we've got all of these options right now, but eventually we have to make enough progress that we can decide which ones we want to pursue to be able to meet the timescales that we're talking about in 10 to 20 years.
In a timely manner. Yeah.
So are you suggesting like an advanced reprocessing demonstration program?
Of some sort? Yeah, I think that would be a really interesting
So it's funny,
Policy
I
program,
I have actually pushed for that, but as a nice stopgap, but I will say though, this technology has been demonstrated on the engineering scale. It is being demonstrated right now with high enriched uranium, so 67% uranium, as opposed to the high assay, low enriched uranium we're talking about, which ranges up to around 20%. So it is actually being done on an engineering scale right now at Idaho National Lab in Idaho Falls. And so I think, and the other thing I want to add on this is that DOE has spent millions, probably billions at this point, of dollars on R&D on recycling. And at some point, we just got to build. I mean, I actually get frustrated when I see people say, oh, well, we got to put more money into funding this. I'm like, I'm used to manage those programs. I know what you're funding. I worked on it in grad school. Like, it's just iterative. It's like, at some point, you just got to get out there and do it and get out of R&D space. And that's what we at Oakland are trying to do. We have been leveraging DOE funding through ARPA-E and through DOE itself, NE. But we're using that to scale up. We're moving towards engineering, like actually building something. And I think that's more imminent than we think. Now, maybe not so much for fluoride volatility. I will admit that I love fluoride volatility and even chloride volatility, but I think it's a little farther down the road. But
So
Okay.
then the question for you and Sven is, how do we get from here to there? Right, in the sense that, yeah, we could be ready to build one. It has to be funded somehow. And
Mhm.
I made some suggestion, but you two, I know, have looked at it a lot more in terms of how do we get from here to there, to develop the reprocessing that we will need when we're there.
So I'll talk about our recent discussions, and I just want to be clear, Orano is not planning on building a reprocessing plant in the United States. So we are working with Oklo, we work with Curio, we work with Shine, we work with Exodus.
Different advanced reactor.
Yeah,
companies.
all different groups. Orano wants to see success for recycling somewhere else other than just France and Japan and China and Russia and in the past UK. Yeah, so what we foresee, so I mean, again, I pointed out 3 benefits of reprocessing, right? It was fuel supply. Well, that's in our own control, how we sell that. Consolidated storage facility, can't really put a price on that. It just makes it easier. Repository though, repository savings. Theoretically, we should be able to contract with the owner of the repository for, saving them space. And potentially simplifying the design of the repository. As I pointed out in France, we're only putting high level waste in there. So I'm not sure how many nuclear engineers are in here, but we have this concern about criticality, which basically an uncontrolled neutron and excursion, which results in a lot of dose. DOE hypothesized that you put this current fuel in its canisters into a repository, 1,000 years or someday, you could have a hypothetical criticality event. If you do reprocessing, you don't have plutonium or uranium in your repository, so you don't have that hazard. So you simplifying the design of the repository. As Christina mentioned, you can produce a uniform high-level waste, whatever you want to call it, cylinder, glass, puck, cement, whatever. Makes it a lot easier instead of having to try to figure out how to handle 30 different kinds of canister designs, or I don't know how many fuel designs we're at this point, probably over 100 fuel designs. If we have to repackage fuel, God forbid we ever should have to do that. That's very painful. So there, if we could contract with somebody to say, look, here are the savings that we offer the repository, would you mind getting into a service contract with us? That'd be one avenue of approach.
Okay,
Yeah, it's
I'm
fine.
sorry. I
Oh, yeah.
would be, yes, cutting you off, but due to time limits, I must continue. So continuing with reprocessing, I actually wanted Dr. Batter to start with the answer for this question, but you guys can follow along. So I know that the state of New York hosted in West Valley the only commercially operated reprocessing plant in the US. And even though this plant ceased operations in 1972, it continues to be decommissioned at great expense to taxpayers. Can you explain how a future reprocessing plant won't become such a burden to taxpayers when shut down?
Yeah, so how many people know about West Valley, New York? Okay, a couple of stakeholders here. Great. So it was a reprocessing plant. It was not a very large one. It was an aqueous separations plant in Western New York. It was shut down in 1972. It was actually trying to be retrofitted, but then some things changed as the seismic criteria and so forth, which made it untenable to restart the plant. And unfortunately, they left it in a really poor condition. They left stuff in process. Um, yeah, trying to clean up a plant that is basically frozen in time is very costly. We have decommissioned reprocessing plants in France, and what we make sure is that as you are preparing to shut down, you clear out the processes. You purge all the nuclear material to the extent that you can. So that's one huge lesson learned. Another thing is that plant actually had some leaks, and they didn't have metal drip trays in there, so concrete got contaminated. Well, when your concrete is 2-3 feet thick and it's contaminated, it's now becoming a really problem to try to tear it apart, and it ends up in a lot of waste. And so what they were looking at is spalling off the top layer of the concrete that was contaminated until they got to the non-contaminated part, which means you had to measure and all this. So the significant burn. So if you had lined the bottom of your cells with stainless steel to collect those spills, that eliminates a huge amount of the cost as well, decommissioning. So we've learned a lot of lessons since the West Valley plant has been operational and shut down that we don't anticipate having to do in the future. Plus, we do waste treatment. So, the problem with Hanford, for instance, and West Valley is that they didn't have a solidification process. The waste got put in tanks, and we're going to take care of that at a future time. You don't have that opportunity anymore. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission has ensured that. That's in the regulation that I think all high-level waste has to be treated and disposed of within 5 years of production. So kind of hard to dispose of it when you don't have a disposal facility. So you had to call exemption to that. But we've learned a lot of lessons since West Valley came around, and we'll also learn a lot of lessons from Hanford. Unfortunately, the repercussions for us is, I mentioned 5,000 people at La Hague. Yeah, I would say probably 30 to 40% of those people are working on waste treatment. So it's a significant effort. So it does come with a cost.
And I do also, I just want to add that because one of the things I pay attention to, I love is like kind of the regulatory history of reprocessing. And so just to provide a little more color to what Sven was saying. So West Valley they submitted their application in 1963. And they got licensed under the regulations in NRC 10 CFR Part 50. That's currently what we use for what we call production facilities that include reactors. And notably at the time, 10 CFR Part 50 was probably 10 pages. It's way longer now, right?
Part 50 is
And-
what you
Yeah, I
use
said
to
it's
license
reactor.
reactors.
Yeah, that's what I said. Yeah. I said it's like production facilities, like reactors, test reactors, and then reprocessing facilities because they were considered production facilities. But at the time, kind of like what Sven said, Appendix F of 10 CFR Part 50, which requires the vitrification or the solidification of spent fuel. It also limited the inventory that you had. It also put in requirements for financial assurances for decommissioning. It restricted like where the vitrified waste could go. All of those requirements, that was in 1969. West Valley started operating in 1966, right? And so that requirement was not there. They also imposed, they being NRC/AEC, they imposed additional requirements related to seismic, tornado protection, things like that. And that caused the cost to go up a lot. And that's why they shut down. But the reason I'm bringing all this up is that the regulations have changed since that time, right? Like I said, we have Appendix F in Part 50. We also have 10 CFR Part 72 that's like fleshed out more. We have Part 61, which is for low-level waste. Like there are all these different regulations that are out there that also require you to provide financial assurances that you can actually pay to dispose of the waste when the facility is decommissioned. There are also, other requirements regarding just making sure that the waste is safely handled. You cannot have like leaking materials, like nothing is liquid just sitting around. So just wanted to provide that additional context. Like in short, the NRC would not allow a West Valley type situation to happen now. So
Yeah, that's so I know for existing reactors and future reactors, the regulator requires the operators of the plant to set aside money for decommissioning. And there has to be a certain amount of decommissioning there, funding there to handle that. And obviously, if there's some extraordinary situation, like something's contaminated that shouldn't be. So I'm assuming the same thing, same kind of requirement will be made for reprocessing facilities, such that there's now, they have to have funding in a fund for reprocessing, for decommissioning of the facility, which is, Sven is talking about, what's involved sometimes. And so hopefully we won't have that situation again where industry is burdening the government on fixing a problem, because the industry then will be required to set aside money for reprocessing, like they do for decommissioning reprocessing facility, like they do for decommissioning reactors.
Oh, and I also forgot to add that they also have to do inspections, right? So like I said, you wouldn't get to a point at which there's like stuff leaking everywhere. Like, when West Valley shut down, it was literally a dumpster fire, right? I mean, things were leaking, workers were getting higher expected doses than expected. So I remember you mentioned the dose part of this. Like, there are really strict requirements regarding dose in Part 20, radiation protection of the NRC regulations. Like, there's all of those requirements coupled with inspectors, there are fuel cycle facility inspectors, I believe, that go and make sure that things are operating correctly. So you just wouldn't run into a situation where you've got leaks and high doses everywhere. The reporting requirements, it's just the regulatory framework is so much more robust now than it was back then. And it wasn't from a lack of trying, in my opinion. This was new territory, right? The 50s and 60s, there were so many fun things that were going on. Aircraft reactor experiment. We tried molten salt reactors, which I love. Sodium fast reactors, which I love. Reprocessing, fluoride volatility. There was all these fun things that were going on, but it was all new territory. So they were just kind of learning as they went. So now that we've got decades of experience behind us, we can better, regulate these facilities. So I really don't think we'd end up in this situation again.
Well, thank you. My last question is meant for Ms. Morales, but you guys can also hop in. Be concise, please, with your answers, since we're running out of time. So, collaboration-based siting has been recognized as an important pathway for developing long-term solutions for SNF. But it's often not a straightforward process, as we mentioned. From your perspective, what are the key challenges in making CBS work effectively? And how might this process be affected if there were one dedicated organization focused only on managing and disposing of spent fuel?
Well, thank you for the question. So it's a lot of the topics we've already hit on. So one, making sure you have all the right people in the room and having the right conversations. When it comes to the nuclear conversation, we're always going to have to get in front of the mis and disinformation that's already out there. We're going to have to demystify spent nuclear fuel, demystify reprocessing, demystify light water reactors, demystify the entire process right now. So making sure that we're getting the right information out there, making sure we have the right people in the room, making it agnostic. I mean, as we've talked about the long history of nuclear in just this panel conversation. So it's been around for a while. We have to make sure that whatever we're creating is enduring going forward. And I do believe that the way to do that is to make sure that we have a collaboration of all interested parties at that point. As far as having a dedicated mission, we talked about it a little bit earlier. Having an answer to the back end of the conversation, the back end of the fuel cycle, ensures the front end of the fuel cycle goes forward. Because however you spin this, doesn't matter what conversation you have, what about the waste will come up? So if you want to have advanced reactors, small modular reactors, micro reactors, reprocessing, what about the waste needs to be answered? So if we had a dedicated system or dedicated mission, then that would, or a dedicated office to do that mission, that kind of addresses that problem going forward, or addresses that concern. I wouldn't say it's a problem, because as we've already said, we're not solving engineering and science right now. What we're solving is sociopolitical.
I will just add that, so this concept of a new organization has been pitched at least since after the shutdown of Yucca Mountain. President Obama organized what was called the Blue Ribbon Commission, which was a group of experts, both technical and policy, who came together and said, okay, how do we move forward? And one of their recommendations was this function of commercial spent nuclear fuel management should probably be moved out of the Department of Energy into some sort of more independent organization that it isn't prone to turnovers associated with political cycles. And what I really want to emphasize here is that, so this is going to require congressional action, and this has been attempted 5 times since that Blue Ribbon Commission came out. There have been the Nuclear Waste Administration Act bills of, I believe, 2014, 2019. There's a couple other years in there, but the last one was 2024, and they have all failed. So there really is an impetus, especially with collaboration-based siting, because one of the things that sort of scares us the most moving forward is, you know, DOE is responsible now and they're making a lot of progress with this CBS effort, but what happens if Congress in 3 years and they're halfway through the siting process comes in and changes who's in charge of all of that? That impacts trust a lot when you're moving forward with the CBS process. So this is one of sort of our near-term motivations for trying to get congressional action to move this function into a new, more independent organization.
Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, the discussion has come to an end.
Can I add in that regard? I'm not gonna address this. I'm just saying, you've heard us talk about a myriad of issues. And quite honestly, you get into it, they're fun, even though they're frustrating. And so it's a plea to all of you. There are jobs out there in research, development, industry, policy, that we need someone who's suffering from aging management to get into. We need all of you to help deal with these issues, because we're still talking about a lot of development that's going on, both technically and policy-wise. So plenty of opportunities for all of you out there, please.
Okay, now we're gonna proceed with our Q&A. So if you have any questions, please start to formulate them. But we're first gonna start with our questions from from those who have RSVP'd. Well, I wanted to ask about, well, this was a question that came up in our forum. So with the rise of HALEU and other proposed new fuels, how might these developments complicate or improve SNF management? And what role could alternative fuel types, such as thorium, play in shaping long-term storage needs?
So I'll go ahead and start. So yeah, as I pointed out, reprocessing gives you that uranium feedstock and the plutonium feedstock. You can actually mix plutonium with uranium and get a HALEU equivalent fuel. So reprocessing has the potential to offset some of the HALEU demand, which, yeah, they say there's a HALEU demand out there. There's no reactors right now that are burning HALEU that have been produced for commercial operation. So yeah, we're still waiting for that day. Orano is planning on building an enrichment plant in Tennessee. And that'll be taking uranium from mines, or from conversion plants actually, and enriching it to up to 5%, maybe up to 8%, which we call LU plus, just to confuse everybody further. Yeah, so reprocessing has that ambition. Thorium is interesting. The thorium reactors actually need uranium-233 to start up. And talk about a rare earth. Yeah, there's only one stock of U-233 left in this country. It sits at Oak Ridge. And yeah, they're looking at potentially throwing it away in WIP, which would be a travesty. But thorium reactors are interesting. If you're a country rich in thorium, such as India, is a great fuel option. Yeah, This country, not so much. Yeah. And we have a lot of experience with uranium, not so much experience with thorium. So, yeah, I always worry about paper studies. We have a lot of paper studies in this country. Yeah, we're good at writing papers. Yeah, trying to build something out of paper is hard. Yeah, so yeah, just take that with a grain of salt. Yeah, we do a lot of great studies in this country, but they don't always come out to be fruitful. I can tell you, we've done similar studies in France. We had different unique ways of trying to separate uranium and plutonium, and guess what became a problem? Well, when you want to recycle, you need to make fuel. Well, we couldn't make fuel out of the stuff we were recovering, just at the small scale. So that's a topic that people don't, often relate. Yeah, but we're all linked together, and you can't do fuel fabrication unless you have a fuel that a feedstock that can be fabricated into fuel. So.
Yeah, so thorium is something that I have also a bit of thoughts on. So when I was back at ARP-E, one of the programs that I was working on was involved with starting up a HALEU, a program focused on using thorium reactors. And this is because there are two reasons. DOE wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole, right? Which I can understand why. We have a uranium industry already. But also because thorium has some interesting properties that I think uranium doesn't have, right? Like, so thorium, I think, it only makes basically one isotope, it's uranium-233. Now, Sven is right, you can start up a thorium reactor with U-233. You can also start it up with HALEU. You can start it up with plutonium, right? So people are also looking at that. I've seen schemes in which they say, well, let's reprocess light water reactor fuel, take the plutonium, start up the thorium reactor with plutonium, recover the uranium, and then use that to run the thorium reactor. I don't, like you said, that's a paper study, but I do like neutronics. I kind of trust neutronics. And so I think it could work. It's a matter of just trying to do it. Now, if it does work, one thing that I think, I haven't done the calcs on this, but I would like to say that, unlike the case with like uranium and stuff, thorium 100% basically goes to U-233. So you could, in theory, like burn it all. It's all of it can go away. So that's what intrigues me about it. I'm not an expert on thorium, but I think that was one of the reasons that we were looking at it at ARPA-E was that, thorium could be like uranium-233 is a fantastic fuel. It's better than U-235, right? It's a very good fuel, running in thermal reactors. And then the other thing I was going to point out was that, kind of to Sven's point, part of the reason we're not going forward with thorium is that technically, like, making fuel with thorium is hard because it has a higher background radiation. It has some daughter products and things that are present in thorium that aren't in uranium. And then also, yeah, we just don't have a fuel cycle. Like someone's got to, have the wherewithal to build it. There's a lot more I can talk to you about that because that's a complicated history regarding that. But I will end by saying that while India does have the largest supply in the world, and Brazil, I think, has a lot too, the US also has a lot of thorium. We're number 3 or 4 in the world. We have a lot. And so this is why the companies like FLIBE and the Thorium Energy Alliance, they're running around pushing for thorium. So like, we have a lot of it. We have more of that than uranium. Why not use it? So those are my thoughts.
So this was before my time when I was at Vanderbilt, but we had a project that looked at the thorium fuel cycle in the United States, and there are benefits. The thing with adopting the thorium fuel cycle is that to fully realize it, you need a national level commitment to a full thorium fuel cycle with multiple reactors, all of the associated processing sites, and that's something that would involve a huge paradigm shift in the nuclear industry. And so that's kind of the big challenge that we saw when we did this study.
And that's why I said that understandably, that's why DOE won't touch it with a 10-foot pole, right? It's like, it's a lot of investment. The only counter argument I could make to that is that's kind of where the nuclear industry, the uranium-based industry was back in the 40s and 50s, right? We didn't have a fuel cycle. We had to make a decision to use it. So you just have to make a case for doing it. And I don't know that the case is necessarily there, but I'm not necessarily averse to thorium.
Yeah, I would agree. It's an option. You'll see a lot of this. There's just policy decisions that need to be made so that we can move forward in some way. And so that's kind of what we're waiting on in a lot of senses here.
Yeah, thank you. We're gonna continue with our in-person questions. So
And she had a
does
question, right?
anyone, yes.
Yeah, you had a question.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. Question about Finland and Sweden and the underground repositories there. Are there lessons about how they got that going? NIMBY, what NIMBY issues they dealt with? How did they get the public behind it? That we could, that would help in this country.
Can I start that and then the rest of the panel jump in?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, I said
Thank
you
you.
would.
Thank you.
I was like, come on, Marla.
So one of the biggest things there is that the political scheme abroad is very different than the US scheme. That is the largest difference there. So did they have a consent-based process? Yes. Did they have public buy-in? Yes. Had they been going at it for 20 years? Also, yes. For example, the repository in Switzerland is underneath, like kind of between two villages. So it's not that they use a different process, but they innately have a different relationship with their regulators and their federal governments, or their version of federal governments. The US just isn't there. So we've taken the lessons learned on what worked with the recognition that there are some things that just politically won't make a whole lot of sense here, and volumetrically also. Our inventory is orders of magnitude larger than what they're dealing with, which means the conversation is almost always going to be different. We have a massive fleet of nuclear. They do not. They have 5 or 6 comparatively. So we're not necessarily always having the same conversation, but we are taking our lessons learned, and consent-based siting, that's actually where it came from. We talked a little bit about that. Like, they started that process, and we're taking those lessons learned.
I agree with everything Marla just said, and I would emphasize that the DOE, i.e. Marla and her team and her predecessors, have had great conversations about the studies that they've done on these international efforts when they've talked to the Nuclear Waste Technical Review Board. The other thing, and kind of getting to Marla's point, and a lot of the experts in the United States agree that absolutely there are incredible lessons to be learned in terms of what you can do from foreign countries. But one of the things you have to think about too with the United States is the size difference of these countries. I know it sounds silly, but a country like Sweden, you're going to have a population that lives within a sort of smaller radius, and they have similar priorities and values because they're interacting in the same communities. When you think about the United States and you think about sort of the disparities between California, Texas, the Southeast, the Northeast, and all of these different values and opinions, it makes it really hard to sort of, pull together the same cohesiveness that you see in these other countries, which can impact when you're talking about a collaboration-based siting process, which is potentially open to the entire contiguous United States. It makes it harder to pull out lessons learned, but they are there and they have been looked at.
Okay.
Can I just want to challenge one thing. Yeah, the Finnish and the Swedish repositories have a lot of fuel in small canisters that are copper coated. So we're talking about, trying to protect spent fuel with a lot of copper. I mean, tons of quantities of copper, tens of thousands of tons actually. So, and that's because they don't reprocess. If they had done reprocessing, they would not need all that material to put, and they might not need as large a repository as they have just because their spent fuel is so spread out.
Well, does anyone else have any questions? If not, then we'll continue to our Zoom questions. So somebody's asking, I've recently learned that oil and gas companies have to decommission their fields. However, when extraction is sold to other companies, those new owners may not have the capital for decommissioning. Are there nuclear protections within a nuclear to ensure future owners also have or funds to decommission in the future?
I think that's already happened in terms of an example where we've had the original reactor operator who started setting up the decommissioning fund that some of us mentioned before. That fund has to be transferred to whoever the new owner is, and that's There's precedent now. We've had some track records for that. So I think that's how we're already set up to be able to manage that problem. That decommissioning fund moves with whoever the future owner would be. I got that right?
Yeah. that's what
Yes,
Holtec
yeah,
does.
and that's actually, I mean, it's happened a
And
couple
Arana.
times, and a lot of times when plants get sold for decommissioning, it's sold to someone specifically for the decommissioning process, and so the NRC has a very stringent review process for going through their decommissioning assurances. And I will just add that, you know, this is something that the public has actually been involved in the process before. So the Palisades plant, when it was sold to Holtec, actually, it went through an NRC licensing proceeding because the state of Michigan wasn't confident with what was originally in the Holtec's decommissioning assurances report. And so they went through a whole NRC licensing proceeding, and it involved negotiations between the NRC, the state of Michigan, and Holtec to make sure that everyone was doing what they were supposed to and everyone was comfortable with what was in the decommissioning fund.
So our next question. Oh, yes.
Hi, thank you for the great panel. It was mentioned a couple of times the need for a nuclear funding overseer that's not subject to the political cycles. I'm wondering more like what could that reasonably look like?
Okay, so there's a few different ways that this could be done. The first is something similar to DOE, which is not what the industry wants, but that has been proposed, which is another federal government agency solely responsible for nuclear waste. Again, that would be still subject to political cycles. So then there's two other options, which is, I'm going to get the terminology wrong here, but one of them is a sort of a federal company. So I don't know if you know what the Tennessee Valley Authority is, or TVA. And so it's kind of a company, but it still has federal government influence. So the president appoints a board, which is composed of, I believe, 10 to 15 different members. But then the board appoints a CEO, and they're responsible for that. So then it kind of operates like a company underneath there. That's kind of the middle ground. And then the last is that the government could just charter a commercial company, which is what was effectively done with Canada and the Nuclear Waste Management Organization. And it's a commercial entity that's responsible. And Sweden and Finland. So those are the three kind of options. The first one is not what I would say the bulk of the industry would see preferable. The second two are kind of where we would like to see things go.
So I think, yeah, speaking for industry, well, I don't want to speak for industry, so I'll just speak for Arano. Yeah, our main goal is to whoever gets this opportunity to take care of disposal gets annual undebated funding. Yeah, so that's not subject to what is the annual budget funding process, which has been broke since 1997. We've had continuing resolutions since 1997. We've never had a passed federal budget. So I think, yeah, the main thing the industry wants is to see certainty on the spending to that agency, whoever it is.
Yeah, I think that's like, I don't care what organization it is, although I like the industry-based one. Has to be steady funding. We can't be dicking around with the funding every single year. Funding goes up, funding goes down. Maybe we'll cut it all together. Oh, maybe we'll bring it back. Get Congress out of the way, or find some way to manage that, because that's the process. That's what they do. They can't help themselves. And therefore, to get that unsteady funding in anything, disposal, developing new reactors, whatever it is, if it's subject to the vagaries of congressional funding, it's going to cost more and take longer.
I'd just like to add from the DOE perspective on the federal side of that, feel free to write letters and talk about everything y'all just said to be supportive of this going forward.
To your senator, not
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, goodness.
Yeah. So I have another question from our Zoom audience. Companies like Flybe Energy and Copenhagen Atomics are developing thorium molten salt reactors that could use nuclear waste as fuel and make commercial in a few years. Is this not a better solution than geological storage?
Uh, Reprocessing does not negate the need for ultimate disposal of some level of radioactive waste. It wouldn't be spent fuel at that point. According to US definitions, it would be high level waste, but there's always going to be some level of waste that will require disposal.
What?
It was a great answer.
Okay, well, thank you. And our last question, question. Could you provide more insight into how we can engage in opportunities in this field, and if there are any initiatives tailored for environmental engineers? Additionally, what steps can we take to ensure our contributions are recognized in this field?
That's a fabulous question. I'd like Marla to weigh in because I'm sure that DOE has some initiatives specifically in that area. I know of some funding sources like NEOP, Nuclear Energy University's program that provides some funding, but Marla, I would invite to be the first responder on this.
Yeah, and Meg can definitely speak to the NEOP component of that and university research. So now DOE at this point, as we take this program forward, whether it's for consolidated storage or reprocessing or repository or any variation thereof, we're going to have a workforce and workforce development, which is kind of what you're asking about. Like, how do we make sure that the right people have the right training, the right education, even if it isn't education, the welders, the construction workers, anyone who has to take part in this program. So we will be developing workforce program development going forward as part of this process. We're in the very initial stages of that because we need to understand where we're looking at and what the supply chain looks like there. And in this case, actually the human supply chain. So I would encourage you at this point, there are opportunities within DOE. Megan can speak to a couple of them. We do also have university programs, fellowships, internships. Feel free to reach out to me and I can try and hook you up with the right people to get you in this path. But yeah, so I would just say for us, workforce development is going to be huge to pull off all of the programs that we're talking about right now.
Yeah, I'll just add, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Sorry. I'll just add, because I'm also very passionate about getting the next generation, trained up and into the nuclear field because it's actually fun, right? I've worked on this in academia, in the government, as well as in industry at this point, and it's been a fun ride, right? And so a couple of things I want to just point out to the Zoom person and to the whole audience is that we gotta need everybody, right? And so if you, like, a lot of people think, oh, you have to be in nuclear engineering or radiochemistry or something like that to join a nuclear industry. No, we need everybody. We need materials engineers, chemical engineers, environmental engineers, right? Even, or chemists, like all kinds of different people, even people with backgrounds in communications,
Yeah.
right? If you look at all of us,
Geologists.
you got people who are in communications, government affairs, policy, all kinds of folks, right? And so I will also add kind of the ANS perspective, because I don't know if anyone from ANS is still on, but I just rolled off the board of directors for ANS, and in that role, I was part of a certificate program and sort of certification program that's focused on bringing in people who are interested in nuclear, who are outside of the nuclear industry into it. And so you can take a whole bunch of certificate courses that can help, you can learn about nuclear safety culture, about the fuel cycle, about regulatory frameworks, things like that. And the idea is, if you are from outside of the nuclear industry and you really want to join this fun bandwagon, right? You can take these courses and get the certificate, and you can use it to help, show proficiency in nuclear science. So that is another option. And also, like Marla said, with the internships, I got my start in internships. Like, that is the absolute best way to get involved in the nuclear industry. I started doing it as, I think, a sophomore, did it junior, senior year, and also even in grad school. So that's a wonderful way to get your feet wet in this field. And again, you do not have to be in the nuclear field in order to do it.
Yeah, Christina is also leading the development of a radioactive waste management certification from the American Nuclear Society that will be debuting this winter at the winter meeting. The other thing I will say is that in the next probably 2 to 5 years, there's going to be a lot more educational programs dedicated to nuclear coming out in the United States. The universities are starting to recognize the way that industry is going, and they're doing their best to respond quickly. We at Vanderbilt are working on something. I'm not allowed to make any announcements today, but so keep your eye out for new programs because they're being released on the daily from the educational perspective. And then, I mean, if you're a current university student, and you have any interest whatever in nuclear, even if you don't have any experience, just reach out to professors that do it at your university. I can't tell you how many emails we get from undergraduates who are like, hey, I'm a mechanical engineering major. I don't really know anything, but this subject seems so cool. I want to do it. We will do what we can to make a research project for you to be able to study this further and tailor it to your interests. So if you're passionate, there are so many ways to get involved, and don't be afraid to reach out to those in the industry because we're happy to help.
I just want to add one quick thing. So you keep talking about the engineering aspect of this. I'm a geologist by trade and training. So I didn't come into nuclear. Oh, see, fellow geologist right there. A lot of people don't come into nuclear because they studied nuclear engineering. It's all the side roads that end up getting you there, right? So if you're talking about siting, a geologist with a background in seismic, or an environmental scientist with land use planning, or an ecologist that has to use that has background in threatened and endangered species. What brings you into the field is most likely something other than nuclear engineering. So I highly encourage anyone who's interested to reach out.
Amen.
Now,
Yeah.
for real jobs, yeah, sorry, I just add some real levity. I mean, co-oping or internships, definitely, as you're going through an undergraduate degree program is highly recommended. I mean, that gives you the company and a free audition for you to go through and gives you the opportunity to learn what's there. If you're looking for actual jobs, yeah, clearly most of the jobs out there are looking for experienced people. So it's always difficult to make an inroad, and that's why the co-op and internships are so important. If you speak French, Orano has about, I think, 200 job openings right now in France. If you go to orano.com or orano.group, sorry, orano.group, there's two websites. There's the American website where I think we have about 50 openings, not on reprocessing because we don't do reprocessing here. If you're in enrichment, that's one area. And then the other set of jobs, which are in France, which are related to mainly to reprocessing and enrichment. So there are lots of openings out there, but again, we're looking mostly for experienced people. And
Yeah.
co-ops count as experience.
And I do want to echo what Megan said. Like, really, the first thing you got to do is ask. Just start asking, right? Because the other thing I forgot to mention about what ANS is doing is they are also starting to partner with community colleges and four-year universities that don't even have nuclear engineering programs to get them, tied up with like developing courses and things like that so that they can offer it to their students. So, but we don't know, like, you have to ask in order to be seen, I guess, if that makes any sense, right? So some of these universities, like I said, they don't have nuclear engineering programs, but they get involved with the ANS because they reach out and they say, hey, you know what? We see a future in nuclear and we want to offer this to our students. And so that's where the partnership starts. And that's where the training comes in, maybe potential internships, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I strongly agree with ask. Just reach out and ask first.
Okay, so our Q&A session has come to an end. And as we wrap up, I want to thank my panelists for their time and expertise, and all of you for joining this important discussion. By now, you're probably thinking, what about the food?
Yeah, what about the food?
Yeah. Well, this is your chance, and not only to eat, but also to continue the conversation. So for those joining us through Zoom, you're welcome to stay on if you'd like to continue engaging with my panelists online. If not, you can log off at this point, and everyone here in person, food will be served in the exhibit room. So to get there, when you step out of the lecture hall, past the elevators, turn right, and you'll see the room. Thank you. Thank you.
It's always fun.
Wait, are you on the panel that Sen has on like?
Yeah, thank you.